Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 158 of Radio 815, the podcast dedicated to examining the work of writer, director, producer J.J. Abrams and his extended Bad Robot universe. I'm Matt Crandall, here with Marcelo Inostroza, as we continue to wind down on the Bad Robot produced series, What About Brien? Today we're going to talk about episodes 14 and 15. Episode 14, What About Finding Your Place, aired February 12th, 2007, and it picks up where Marcelo, Adam has decided, after all of this back and forth with Marjorie and Heather, he is now a single man and he is taking a vow of celibacy. What is your read on that situation, as that basically kicks off the episode where Adam tells Jimmy his new revelation?
Of all the things that they could have done with Adam, a vow of celibacy was the most outrageous, funniest thing I've ever heard of, because Jimmy and Brien, until Brien got serious with Bridget, like all the boys in What About Brien, even Dave to some extent. Well, let's not include Dave because he's always been kind of really dedicated to Dina, but everybody else in that show, if you're a male per se, everybody in that show has been a dog. And it was really interesting to see Adam's sort of new take on life after deciding to leave Heather and deciding that, he only dated Heather because of his, as a rebound, and his resolve of, okay, I'm going to get my life together. I'm going to go for this new promotion at work. And part of that, and part of me trying to build out a new life for myself is no sex, no women for X amount of time until I get that big promotion at work. And that led to some very, very hilarious scenes with Jimmy and the gang. But this episode made me really hate Jimmy, because I'm like, you suck. I don't like you at all anymore. I don't care. Like, I don't care. And the other thing that I noticed about this episode is, did you notice they changed the opening credits and they finally gave Amanda Foreman her own credit thing, as well as the actor who plays Jimmy, which was really cool. I thought, but it's a little bit too late, but really cool.
Yeah, I noticed it on the next episode because they added new cast members to the new opening. So if it was on this one, I just didn't pay attention. But I know on 15 they have the new beginning, and they put the other new additions who aren't even on the show yet, who show up by the end of next week. They're all there.
Yeah. I thought that I thought that was very, very, very cool. That they did that. But again, at this point in the show's history, I'm like hanging by a thread, or I'm like, okay, how are you going to finish up, and what last good funny eggs are you going to give me so I can say that What About Brien wasn't a complete waste of our time?
Right. So I couldn't remember if they knew or not when it got canceled, but these two episodes together made me think that they had no idea that they were getting canceled, because as it used to happen back in the day, they got picked up initially for a 13 episode order. So by the end of 13, they wrap up the Marjorie stuff. They got rid of Heather. They did the soft reset. And this episode is where they are transitioning into, again, what they want the show to now be. And episode 15 is where if the new dynamic solidifies by the end of it. And they're like, okay, this will be the show going forward if we get to keep going and going and going. But of course, we know that they don't. They only get a handful of, they got picked up for a back six or whatever it was. And we're going to see that they're trying to get new viewers by retooling everything, which is wild because they already retooled the show at the start of season 2. And now we're watching live as they retool it. And part of that retooling, the cliffhanger at the end of last week, was after the lake house trip, Brien and Bridget got back and found out Brien's dad was embezzling money from the company, stole it all, and left the country. And everybody's on the hook. And so this episode tells us that there's nothing left. Brien's dad has tons of debts, and that means that everything in his name that is still here, the bank is taking. And unfortunately, Brien's dad was a co-signer on Bridget's condo, which means she no longer has a place to live because the bank is going to take that condo and flip it to try and get some of their money back. So she has to move in with Brien, which is something that they have been trying to like elevate their relationship to the next level. But so they decide like, okay, we're going to do it. She's going to move in. And as this episode goes on, we see all of the things that really annoy each other about them because they're trying to make it work. And part of me gets frustrated when, to make ends meet, now that Brien doesn't have a job at the real estate firm, he decides he's going to be the building handyman. And Bridget's kind of pissed off. She's like, I didn't sign up to be with some schmo who fixes toilets. And I thought this was really a weird choice, which shows me that they're planning to show Bridget the door very soon, because you're like, she's picking a fight for no reason. Like, this doesn't make any sense that she would be like, well, I didn't sign up to be with a working class guy. And so their whole fight, and then add to that, all of a sudden, two hotties move in downstairs, and there's a moment where it's literally like slow-mo of these babes pulling up and bending over their cars, and, you know, it's a Hey Jimmy moment. And throwing these obstacles into the Brien and Bridget relationship, did it feel organic to you, or did it feel like they are about to reset the show in some way and they maybe need to get Bridget the fuck out of here because we can't have a show about a single guy playing the field if he's tied down to a girlfriend 14 episodes into the second season?
That did not feel organic to me at all. I really got disappointed in Brian's sort of lack of self-control because you, Matt, and the people listening to this right now, in the weeks past, I've been very, very happy with Brian's character development that the writers have done for him in the second half of the second season here. But this episode really felt like a step backwards in the wrong direction for no good damn reason. Like Matt said, they shuffled the deck and reinvented the show at the beginning of the season, and for some reason now, this late in the game, they did it again. So I don't know why they chose to sort of reshuffle the deck twice. The only thing that I can gather is similar to what Matt said. They must have had no idea what was coming, which is unbelievable. And number two, at this point, they must have had no idea what they were doing. Because if you're shuffling the deck this late in the season, not knowing if you're going to come back or not, it's just something so stupid. And the other thing, Bridget has been shown to be a very, very, very insecure individual, right? Even when they were in the lake house in last episode, Bridget was complaining because Brian's stupid, dumbass friends didn't like her. Bridget wants things done her way. And Bridget doesn't seem like the individual, or Bridget doesn't seem like a individual that believes in sacrificing herself for her partner's happiness. I understand that Brien was a good real estate agent and he was getting his screw back, but you guys have to remember that the only reason that he was there in the first place is because he needed money from his dad. If he didn't need money from his dad, he wouldn't have been there in the first place. So I kind of knew already tenfold that as much as I loved Brien and Bridget, it wasn't going to last very long if Bridget didn't learn how to make sacrifices for Brien. And this, with the sexy neighbors moving downstairs and Brien being the super in the building, is just an indication that, like Matt said, the relationship between Brien and Bridget may not be long for this world, or it might be tested.
Yeah, I think we're going to see that as things unfold. And the other key thing that happens early in the episode is that Carrie gets her surgery, Dave and Dina's daughter. And so, you know, they're worried and they're bonding over their worry for their daughter. And then when she's fine, but now they have to wait a couple of months to figure out if the surgery worked or not, they also get a few bonding moments. And that is compiled with, you know, Dave has been crashing with Brien, but now that Bridget's living there, Dave is kind of a third wheel. And so he comes back and it's awkward where, like, you know, Brien and his girlfriend are trying to take things to the next level and they got Dave hanging on. So there is a funny scene where the guys go out to a bar and Adam is getting hit on by this dude who's like super into him. And Adam's like, hey man, like, I'm not gay. And they're like, oh yeah, sure you're not. And so there's some funny humor there. And Dave tells him, like, Brien, I got to move out. Like, you've been good, but obviously I'm cramping your style. So I got to figure something out, and Brien gets a number given to him by a guy, which is a pretty funny moment. And he just kind of looks at it and he's like, oh, okay. And then Dave decides he's going to crash with Adam. So he just shows up at Adam's door. And it's funny because Adam has taken a vow of celibacy and Dave shows up and Adam's watching like a porno. And he's like, okay, I guess celibacy doesn't include, you being by yourself. But he's like, I'm sleeping on the couch. Like, I'm coming in. And Adam's like, I guess. And Adam, not being a good friend, then in the morning tries to make things uncomfortable as hell. So Dave is asleep and Adam's blaring some music. So Dave gets up and then Adam is eating completely naked at his breakfast table. And Dave's like, okay, dude, I guess I gotta get the fuck out of here because I don't think this is gonna work if you're just gonna have your schwanz wagging around while you're having breakfast and I'm gonna be trying to do my stuff. And so he's like, all right, man, I guess I'll figure something else out. And he's like, oh, by the way, you got a cornflake on your dick. And Adam looks down. He's like, yeah, what made you look? And so a funny moment. But by the end of this episode, Dave and Dina have come to an agreement where Dave is going to actually move back into the house, partly because the Carrie surgery recovery, they want to make sure everything is okay. But also in this retooling, I think they kind of realized that they want a steady married couple on the show. And Jimmy and Ivy are not really working. And they have gotten all the other married couples are no longer married or whatever. So they want to have like the one steady couple, and they realize, Angelo's dead. Ivy and Jimmy aren't fitting in. Dave and Dina was that couple at the start of the show. And they're like, maybe in this reset, we need to get them back together so that we can have the trials and tribulation of being, married in your late 30s and what that's like. And we fucked up by doing this whole open marriage, them splitting up storyline. And so we can see that by him moving back in, nothing happens in this episode, but you can tell that that's where they're going to start to take it, is that they realize that when they mess with that dynamic, that was when they had other couples on the show, but now all those other couples have imploded and they want to explore those stories if the show had more life going forward. So how do you feel when Dave moves back in? And it's pretty clear that, like, because of this surgery stuff, him and Dina are starting to find themselves drawn to each other in a way that we thought was over.
I hate it, but I'll tell you why I hate it. I have been screaming to all high heavens, and I have been screaming to the bad robot guys, to the bad robot gods. Matt knows it because he's been here with me this whole time. I have said the writers need to have Dave on one side and Dina on the other, and only have them come together to take care of their kids, and only come together when it concerns their kids. And putting them back together, having them rediscover their marriage is like, oh man, you spent so much time making me hate these people, and now you expect me to feel sympathy for them because, number one, their daughter has a hearing issue, and number two, when they get back together, you're going to show how much they've changed and how much they've grown as people. Sure, that might only last for a while, but after they sort of get used to the new dynamics with their deaf daughter, I bet you they're going to go back to the same squabbling little fucking shit that they had before. So look, Dave moving back in with Dina at least doesn't leave him homeless and gives him a place to live. But I'm really not down for these people rediscovering why they loved each other in the first place, because they've been so mean and nasty to each other throughout this whole process. And and I do appreciate that Dave and Dina are putting aside their own bullshit for the sake of their daughter. But I'm afraid that once they get used to that new dynamic, and once they get used to learning how to navigate it, they're going to fall back in their own tendencies. And if they fall back on their own tendencies, who's going to have to sit here and watch it? We are. And that's something that I don't want to do.
Right. Yeah. It's something that I just feel like they got to find a way to make this either work or just commit. They got to commit either way, and then they can find a way. But this, like, they're not together, maybe they're getting back together stuff is just starting to get exhausting. It feels like we're on a seesaw.
Also, one quick word on Adam's ingenious way to get Dave out of the apartment. That was just like, that was just so funny because, as Matt said, Adam is cranking up music. Dave wakes up, goes into the kitchen, and Adam is there in all of his glory eating breakfast. And I'm like, that is a way to get a straight guy out of an apartment. You just worked right there. That was absolutely so excellent. It was just so great. It was so funny.
Yeah, it was one of the really funny bits. The other sort of storyline is the girls decide that they're going to have a book club. And of course, none of them read the book. And so they were going to read the Notebook, and then they decide everybody's just going to watch the movie. And so we see like multiple times. Dave watches the Notebook like 5 times in this episode or something. Like, so Dave like really loves it. And after the new hot chicks neighbors move in, Brien continuing to just completely fuck up. So I'll say we get the new neighbors, Stephanie and Laura, who are played by Stacy Keibler and Jessica Zor. She's in one of my favorite underrated comedy movies, Fired Up, which is like the stupidest but funniest movie about cheerleading. And she would go on to be on Gossip Girl. She sticks into these kind of things. So she's on like a lot of these teen shows. But Brien has a dance party with them, and he gets caught by Bridget. And she's like, the fuck is going on here? And so she was already mad that she didn't like living with a handyman, and they like are fighting as they're making their dinner. But like, Brien is not doing themselves any favor. Like, you could be a handyman, but don't get caught by your girlfriend having a dance party with the hot next door neighbors. That's stupid. And so there's a point shortly after this where Dave and Brien are watching the Notebook together. And Brian's like, ugh, this is not for me. And Dave's like, dude, you got to pay attention to this movie. And Brian's like, it's not better than Old School. You lied. And Dave's like, no, but this is the story of your life, Brien. Like, you're drawn between these two different things, and you have to realize you got to make the right choices, and you can't let your dad fuck up your whole life because he has done what he has done, and he always screws you over, and he's done it again. So you got to make the right decisions now regarding Bridget and your future. And so Brian's like, taking all of this in and realizing that he's got some big choices ahead, because he's got to decide, is this the right one? Do I want to be in a relationship, or should I shake things up and rock the boat? So that's where we leave Brien and Dave and them in the episode. The final scene of this is Nicole starting to find that she's attracted to her babysitter, Jamie. And right at the end of the episode, Jamie comes out wearing just a towel because he had a shower, and Nicole is starting to think like maybe she might be ready to get out there again. And that's kind of where the episode ends, which brings us to episode 15, What About Temptations, that does pick up immediately with Nicole and Jamie. And it's obvious, like it's so obvious that it's a dream, because he's standing there in a towel and they start to go at it. And I'm like, there's no fucking way. And of course, yes, it's a dream. She wakes up, and we do get this new title sequence where now Amanda Foreman, Jimmy, also the new neighbor Laura, but not Stacy Keibler, is in the opening, as well as Tiffany Thiessen, who shows up in the opening of this episode as good old Kelly Kapowski from Saved by the Bell, and White Collar. She's been everywhere. She's done a lot of stuff. She shows up as the new CEO of the video game company that has bought and is merging with Dave's video game company. So Marcelo, what are you thinking as we start this episode? Sex dream, new boss, new title sequence.
I really, really enjoyed the title sequence. I'm really happy that they finally gave Amanda Foreman her title card, because I was like, you bring her in for a whole season and you don't give the fucking woman a title card? They gave half the season to the actress who played Marjorie, and no disrespect to her, she's wonderful, but she wasn't even there at the time. So I'm really glad they updated the opening credits. Also, it was really cool to see Kelly Kapowski from Saved by the Bell. I know character names more than I do real actors' names, guys, so you'll have to forgive me. But this episode, starting with a dream sequence, focusing on Brian's sister. Wait a minute, Brien has a sister? I had no idea. She's just like wow, I completely forgot about her. It's really cool. It's really nice of them to give Nicole something to do in this episode, and to give her the storyline of, oh, I think I'm having feelings for my nanny who's a guy, so to sort of not deal with those feelings, I'm going to do this, but then to discover that I'm a shit mom without my nanny. I really, really like where her storyline goes. Also, with Dave getting a new boss at his video game company, I thought that that was very, very interesting because I thought that Dave was going to get fired. This whole episode, I was like, what's the worst thing that could happen to Dave in this moment when he has a kid with a massive hearing problem that he's gonna have to pay through the roof for basically the rest of his life? What if he got fired? But what actually happens in this episode is the most sort of it's the most obvious choice for the writers to do, but I didn't see it coming. Did you see it coming with what happens with Dave in this episode?
Not quite. By the end, you're like, oh yeah, this is all just part of the building blocks of resetting the show to what it used to be before they fucked with it. So it's like, okay, but I didn't see, it's interesting when Tiffany Thiessen shows up in the elevator and she's riding up and she's like, Dave Greco. And he's like, yeah. And she's like, don't you remember me? I was your assistant on Throttle Autobahn. And he's like, and she's like, I used to be fat. And he's like, oh shit. Okay. And then he's like, oh, you're here now? She's like, yeah, part of the merger. He's like, okay, great. And then when she announces that she's CEO and she's actually the head, I was worried for Dave because, as it's been established, he might not have been nice to her when he was the boss and she was the assistant. And we find out that, a lot of people used to have a mean nickname for her and didn't treat her very well because they didn't like the way she looked. And now she's obviously had a glow up and is hot as hell and is the boss. And she's like, I know you might be worried that a lot of these mergers, a bunch of people get fired and everybody has to sing for their supper to make sure they stay. And you think she's going to diffuse the tension. And she's like, that is what's happening here. That is the situation. Get ready, fuckers. And so Dave is sweating. So it does seem like he might be in a bad spot, which would be dramatic now that his home life is starting to stabilize because we see him and Dina getting along at home and like kind of sharing some looks at each other that of course they're going to throw a grenade into his work scenario. So I thought that was interesting. And as we go along, we start to see that there's more at play than just Dave kind of being the odd man out. And, he mentions to Tiffany, oh yeah, when I was at Zap Monkey, she's like, never heard of it. Don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And I was like, wow, how did this... We've been led to believe that Zap Monkey and some of the stuff they were doing was like very important in the industry. And then we were told it's not. And then of course it's a fake out because by the end she does reveal she did know about this all and is impressed with it. So I thought that was an interesting way they took us to get through this maze because I was worried for Dave because I honestly just thought for us, I'm like, I don't want to see this guy moping and out of work because it's going to take up so much time of the episode that I won't give a fuck about. So can we please just keep this guy here?
Also, to continue on your thought process there, but going in a different direction, I've always wondered, what does Brien bring to the Zap Monkey team of Brien and Dave? And we discover in this episode that Brien is not the designer, Dave is the designer, but Brien is the story guy. So I really, really appreciate that they finally told us what Brien actually did at Zap Monkey. He actually thought up the stories for the games that they created at Zap Monkey. So I really, really appreciated that as well. But if I could ask you one thing that's not necessarily in this episode, but it pertains to this episode with all the new cast members that they just introduced out of nowhere. Why do you think that they didn't choose to elevate Amanda Foreman and her husband to be more integrated with the cast instead they brought in Stacey Keebler and that other beautiful actress? Why do you think they made that choice? Because they've had Amanda Foreman here since the beginning. And like, if you have her, why don't you use her?
I think it's partly because they thought that Ivy's bar was going to be more of a hangout that they would go to, and it hasn't worked out that way. And they wanted Adam to have someone to play with at work, but Jimmy is kind of unlikable. So I just feel like Jimmy and Ivy have not gelled in the way that they necessarily anticipated. And so I feel like they need to shake things up with those characters to make us care. Now, whenever Amanda Foreman is in it, she's funny. Like, she is still really funny. She's got that great deadpan, and I like all of that, but they aren't deploying her and Jimmy in any meaningful way. They're just kind of there to bounce off other characters, and they don't actually have any interesting stories of their own. And I feel like that would probably be something that they would fix in the third season if this had gotten it. But they maybe realized, like, you know, what we're doing right now isn't working, but we don't have the time to dedicate to that. And we had to bring in the new hot chicks to mess with Brien, and Brien is the titular role. So, like, that's the guy who's always got to be on the show, right? So they got to find a way to make his storylines engaging first. And it is just frustrating that, like, yeah, Amanda Foreman is great. And obviously Jason George would go on to a great career, but here he's just not, it's just not fitting in. And we see that where Adam's storyline in this episode is, you know, he's on his celibacy journey until he gets his promotion, till he makes partner. And he wants to get in with the guy who's like the mid-tier. If you're in with this guy, then you can make partner. And so Jimmy got in with that guy a few episodes ago. And there's a funny moment where Adam is waiting to hear if he's on this new team or not. And Jimmy shows up and he's like, hey man, you didn't get it. Sorry. And Adam goes, this fucking prick. Like, he starts going on this rant. And then the boss walks in and goes, tell me what you really think. And Jimmy goes, gotcha. And we find out it was just a prank because Adam is going to be part of this new team. And so there is this back and forth prank war, low stakes prank war between Jimmy and Adam in this episode, where at the bar in front of Ivy, a woman comes up to Jimmy and says, hey, Jimmy, whoever. And he's like, yeah, good to see you. And he doesn't remember her. And she's like, don't you remember we slept together? And Ivy's like, excuse me, what? And then Adam reveals that this is all just part of his revenge because he was embarrassed in front of the boss. So I kind of like that, but that shows you where they're trying to make Jimmy and Ivy work, but it needs to be in relation to other people's shenanigans, and they never really get up to their own.
Also, they do introduce a story thread between Jimmy and Ivy in this episode. Are you guys impressed? I actually got their names right. They do introduce a story thread between the two of them that they discussed early on in their marriage that they weren't going to have kids. And Ivy mentions late in this episode that she wouldn't say no to kids. And when she says that, Jimmy is taken aback, so much so that they leave where they are and they like have this very, very not fighty conversation, but this very, very weighty, potentially fighty conversation about them deciding whether or not they're going to have kids. And it ends up going in a funny direction, but I would have really have loved to seen what they would have done with that. And that could have been a potential way to give Jimmy and Ivy a story of their own, to sort of separate them from being supporting characters to the rest of the cast, like Matt suggested.
Yeah, I think that would have been, you know, we can see, like I said, they're trying to find a way to make season 3 where they can actually give those characters some agency, but they'll just never get that third season. Now, Bad Robot Easter egg has to be addressed. This episode starts with Brien getting a brand new haircut. He's got a short haircut now. The long hair is gone. And there is a moment when he visits Dave at work, and Dave is like, oh, God damn it. My boss is fatty natty, and she knows that I used to make fun of her. And they're riffing, and Brien gives him some advice and says, like, well, you're going to have to do this and this and this. And Dave goes, thanks for the tip, Felicity, because Brien just chopped off all his hair. And so it's a reference to when Felicity chopped off all of her hair, which, of course, is Bad Robot. So that had to be addressed, and I had to pause it. I was just laughing so hard at this throwaway line from Dave because Brien got his hair chopped off. And then we find out Brien is a shit handyman, which we kind of suspected, because the girl neighbors are like, you fixed this thing and you didn't fix it, and we're having a big party tonight.
When the hot girls had a leak in their apartment and they came back downstairs and they were like, where the hell are we gonna have the party now because we have a ton of people coming over because of the movie that Stacy Keebler was a part of. I thought that would have been a perfect opportunity for the writers to go back to Ivy's bar. Like, it would have been great, right?
Would have made perfect sense because, yeah, they know a person who's got a perfect venue for a rap party, but instead, like I said, Brien, on his quest to get Bridget to dump him, subconsciously says, why don't we just have the party at my place? And so then cue up Nelly Furtado's Promiscuous Girl blasting, and everybody's hanging out, and Brien, of course, is mixing it up with these younger women, and you're like, dude, are you fucking kidding me? What are you doing? And we just know that, like, when Bridget finds out about this, she's gonna be pissed. And eventually, there's this really, like, one of the most cringe-worthy scenes in this, but it shows you what they are kind of envisioning possibly. So we see Brien is trying to keep himself away from the party. And eventually he sees that one of the hot chicks, the new Jessica Zore's character, Laura, is on his computer. And she's like, you know, I don't like video games, but this video game you've got here is amazing. It's incredible. And Brian's like, is it? Am I a great video game guy? And she's like, yes, you are so good at video games. And I usually think video games are dumb, but I love your video game. And I'm like, what in the absolute fuck? This is the dumbest scene I've ever seen. She literally played 10 seconds of what looks like the worst game I've ever seen and is now like hyping up Brien. And so he's feeling good. And we can tell that maybe there's going to be some tension there. What did you think as that's where they're kind of taking it? We can see that this one neighbor is maybe going to be an interest for Brien.
The dialogue reading in that one scene is so fucking atrocious. It's so, I mean, dialogue has to be really bad to pull me out of a scene. And this one scene pulled me out of the episode. For as long as the scene went on, it took me a couple minutes to lock back in. But it's a really, really clumsy way to say to the audience that, we got you loving Brien and Bridget, but guess what? We're gonna do a 180 and we're gonna fuck that up and we're gonna go with the we're gonna stick Brien with one of our new toys so he can play for a while. Which to me, I'm like, this is bullshit. You've invested all this time in Brien and Bridget. You've done all this fucking character work with Brien, and now you're gonna throw that away for what? For absolutely nothing. So that makes me think that, again, I'm gonna say it again, like I said it in the last episode that we talked about. These writers are basically in the writer's room writing away with their goddamn fucking heads cut off, because what are they doing? What are they fucking doing? Like I really appreciated that in this really clumsy bad scene that this character took the time to sort of prop Brien up and to remind us that his true passion is in video games, which we'll come back in a second. But the video game that he's working on to go off one of Matt's points is so bad. This video game looks like it was rejected by the designers of the fucking Sims. It looks so bad. So watching this exchange with Brien and the new girl happen, I'm like, what are they doing? Why are they trying to set this up this fucking late? Like, it just makes no sense, and it really, really fucking aggravated me so much.
Yeah, it just felt really it was just really cringe. And of course it is to prop Brien up and remind him that video games is his love. And as you said, we kind of find out that the dynamic with him and Dave is that Brien is the George Lucas to Dave's Steven Spielberg, and when they do stuff together it becomes Indiana Jones, and when they're apart then it can be 1941 or something. Like, they need each other to sometimes get across that and make it more special. And there is a scene where Dave does his like small pitch, and the new boss, Natasha's like, it's shit. And he confronts her she's working out in a gym. And of course, this is all because she used to be heavier in the past. And she says, like, you guys didn't ever see me. And he's like, oh, well, it's just because I called you Fatty Natty that you didn't like my idea. And she said, no, like, yes, you were a piece of shit back then. And just because I had a different body type, you saw right through me and you didn't, whatever. She said, but that's not it. She said, what we need is great ideas. And you ain't got them right now. That's not what you got. She said, and you can be pissed and think that I'm holding a grudge against you because you used to be a prick to me. But that's not what it is. The truth is, I have passed you. I have risen in the ladder higher than you, and you're becoming a bit irrelevant. So step up your game, asshole. And so I like that, they kind of clear the air about whether this is a personal grudge or not. And she just says, no, like, I want you to be great, but right now you aren't. And we find out by the end because Brien goes to plead the case for Dave, and he rides up in the elevator, and we don't see the results of that until Brien shows up at work, and it's the best scene of the episode where Dave's like, the fuck are you doing here? And he's like, well, this is my desk. And he's like, what? And so we find out, that they are back together. They're working together in the same cubicle. They're splitting a thing. And we find out that Natasha actually knows all about Zap Monkey, knows their past. And she wanted to recruit Brien anyway, but she needed to do it in a way that kind of fucked with Dave to get him a little bit insecure so that he would up his game. So this was all part of her master plan. And Brian's even like, well, why didn't you just call me and hire me? And she's like, no, we needed to do this to like shape dynamics, which is kind of a little bit of a like, in real life, she would have just called, but for the dramatics of the episode, it worked. And so honestly, by the end of this episode, everything is coming up Dave, because there's a moment earlier where he sees his wife naked at home and they have like some longing looks. And then Dina tries to get him to notice her and tries to seduce him, and it doesn't work because he's so oblivious. But then by the end, now he's got his buddy back at work, and him and Dina start to get things back together. They're going to have a date. They're going to try and mend these fences. So how are you feeling? Because I know Dave is not your favorite guy, but by the end of this, everything's looking good at his job, and he's got his wife back, and they're going to try and make this thing work.
You're right. Dave is not my favorite guy. With the last scenes of this episode being so Dave-centric, I really, really was reminded why I fell in love with Dave as a character from season 1, because for some reason, I don't know how this happened and I don't know why. These last couple scenes really reminded me of the Dave of old. And I don't know if it was because Brien was there. I don't know if it was because his dynamic with Dina seems to be going better, but there was something in these final 2 scenes that gave me hope, and that said to me, for this final run of this show, Dave is not going to get on your nerves anymore. We're going to remind you why you used to love Dave in the first place. So I really appreciate that. But the thing that resonated with me the most about the final moments of this episode is when we discover that Kelly Kapowski's whole plan was to piss Dave off in order to get him motivated, not only to work harder, but to bring Brien into the fold, into the company, to solidify the relationship of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, to use Matt's term. So I really like that. And the reason why I connected with it so much is because when I'm having trouble writing a script or hammering out an idea, or I get stuck somewhere, there's one individual that pisses me off more than anything in the world. And one conversation with her about how I suck and about how I can't do something really motivates me to push forward and to solve that problem that I'm having issues with, and to show her that I can actually do the thing that I'm having trouble with. So I really appreciated that Kelly Kapowski figured out the way to motivate Dave is to piss him off, and then as a reward, I'm going to give him his best friend back, or I'm going to give him his George Lucas back. So I really liked her mischievous plan. And again, the reason why I liked it is because I'm motivated by negativity as well as Dave is.
Right. You want to spite someone and be like, in your face, motherfucker. You doubted me, never doubt me. So I thought that was an interesting way to take it. The only other plot line of this episode that we kind of skip over, and it's the one that ends the actual episode, is that earlier, Nicole is still dealing with this fact that she has a hot manny, and she is wondering if he is gay or not. And she just starts to try and feel it out, because they're like, just ask if he likes to watch football or not, and you'll figure it out. And she starts to go in light, and then she's just like, I don't know, are you gay? And he's like, what? And So long story short, she fires him because she feels like there's too much tension there and that it's not going to be good for her. But then Bella is a little bit too much for Nicole to handle on her own, and she does need the help. And Bella misses Jamie, and there's a moment where they meet Jamie in the park, and he's like, oh, look at this is the cute baby I used to take care of. And she's like, okay, I fucked up. Like, you got to come back. And hires him back. And then at the end of the episode, she's like, look, the reason I fired you is because you're a smoke show and I'm feeling horny. And whenever you're around, I don't know what to do because I'm getting too hot. And the guy's like, oh, okay. And then he's like, oh, what the fuck? And they start to go for it and they start making out. And that's where the episode ends. Nicole is about to get plowed by her nanny, Jamie, which is kind of a, not to be rude to Rosanna Arquette, but I'm like, this dude could get anyone that he wants. I don't see it. I don't know how he's going to be like, yes, give me this up and down, can't make up her mind, mother of a newborn. Like, I'm just like, I don't buy it, but okay. I see that they're trying to get her back on the horse and out there again. And that's how they feel is the best way to do it.
Nicole, to me, comes off as a very, very neurotic person. And if I was a nanny dealing with her baby, I wouldn't want to get involved with her because she's very, 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 very up and down. She's very bipolar. And the way that we know that she's very bipolar is by the fact that before she found this incredibly buff person to be her nanny, she was like firing nannies left and right because she didn't feel secure in the people that she hired to take care of her baby. So I think that for a while, she's going to be at peace with this nanny, but I think that eventually she's going to find some reason to sort of pull away from him and to sort of find a bigger excuse to fire him. And the reason why I'm thinking that is because Brien and Nicole are brother and sister. And Brien, as we well know, thinks of reasons to break up with people because of his own insecurities. And I think with Angelo no longer in the picture, I think that this is an opportunity for the writers to show that it's a family issue. And I think that would be really interesting to explore because I'm with Matt. There's no way that a guy like this who could pull anybody off the street would go for somebody like Nicole. I am happy that she's getting more to do in this episode. She's getting more integrated into the main cast, and they finally gave her own story, which I really appreciate, but it's too fucking late. So yeah, look, I like where the show's going with Nicole, but I think that it's way too late to give her something meaningful to do. And if they give her something meaningful, if they give her a meaningful relationship with this guy, she's gonna fuck it up.
Right. We've seen her past behavior, and that doesn't seem like too much of a stretch. And with only 4 episodes left of the series, this episode was a big reset. And the other breadcrumb that they did throw in was Adam visits the guys at Zap Monkey, and the new boss hits on him. And he's like, oh, sorry, like I'm on a celibacy kick. But she's like, okay, well, I'm going to keep my eye on this guy anyway. So they plant that seed, and we'll have to see if anything comes of that as we go forward. So next week, we will talk about episode 16 and 17 of season 2 as we are in the final home stretch here. If you guys have any comments or questions for us, you can tweet using the hashtag Radio815. You can add us on Twitter at JJUniverse815. We can get emails, JJUniverse815 at AOL.com. Like, follow, subscribe. We are also on YouTube. If you want to listen to the episodes on YouTube, that's a good spot. And Marcelo's been revamping the YouTube and has a lot of stuff coming up that if you want to leave comments on there, we will see them. And if the people want to get in touch with me, nope. I'm logging movies on letterboxd.com/MDC3000, but I basically have abandoned 90% of social media. But Marcelo loves social media, and he is still kicking it on X. Marcelo, how can the people get in touch with you?
Yeah, if you want to get in touch with me and talk about anything Bad Robot, or to ask me what we're going to do here in the future on this very program, you can just reach me on X. I'm at CreekFanatic88.
That'll do it for this time. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, Radio 815 over and out.
Radio 815 is a Balloonhead Productions presentation. in association with Killer Newt Productions.